Okay, in this second talk, I'm going to discuss the importance of rest and recovery. So, we are very familiar with the idea that if we do not get enough sleep, then this can affect our health and physically, and also maybe our mental health as well. And this is the same for horses. They need to have sufficient rest and recovery in order to keep healthy and to keep performing well. Next slide, please. So even in a healthy horse, training and racing can cause damage and changes in the body which affect performance. So the horse may become dehydrated, it will lose sweat and electrolytes. Hard exercise can suppress the immune system, making the horse more likely to suffer from respiratory infections. It can suffer depletion of vitamins in hard training. Again, vitamins such as vitamin C, vitamin E are very important for the immune system. It may suffer a reduction in energy stores, which will negatively affect performance. Electrolyte loss, which also affects performance, and damage to soft tissues. So these are things that happen even in the healthy and fit horse. Next slide, please. So when we train a horse, we have, before the next training session, we have maybe around 24 hours recovery. And then we train again, and then we have another recovery period. Of course, when we enter a horse for a race, maybe the horse is trained the day before, and that then has a big impact on how the horse will race, depending on what that training is. And then there is a recovery period between the last training and the race, and between the race and the next training period. Next slide, please. So, how long does recovery after training or racing take? Because if we do not allow sufficient recovery, then we can have an adverse effect on the horse's performance. Next slide, please. How quickly or how much a horse recovers after training or racing depends on fitness. Fitter horses will recover quicker. The harder the exercise, the longer it takes to recover. There are things that we can do that help to speed recovery, so icing of the legs, making sure the horse is fed the right feed, allowing access to water. All of these things are known to help speed recovery. If a horse has an injury, then of course it may take a lot longer to recover. And how much time we allow. If we allow a horse 2 to 3 days to recover from a race, then it will be in a much better position than if we were only to allow 1 day. The interesting thing is that different body systems take different times to recover. So we know that the orthopedic system, the bones and the joints and the ligaments and the tendons, can take, after a very hard race, 2, even maybe 3 weeks to recover. The immune system, after traveling and very hard racing, may take 2 weeks to recover. Muscles, around about a week. And things like the lungs and the energy stores recover relatively quickly within a few days. Next slide, please. If a horse does not recover fully after hard training or after racing, then the horse will have reduced strength or endurance, maybe not so happy to exercise, and be at increased risk of injury and illness. And what this really leads to is reduced performance. Next slide, please. So, can we influence recovery? Can we make the horse recover better? Well, there are two main areas where we can possibly do this. The first is looking at nutrition and hydration, and the other is looking at management, so using things like cooling and icing. Next slide, please. So when we look at, if we think just about water and energy, after a light training, we have some, next slide please, loss of water and energy stores. Next slide please. By the next day, these should have recovered. And then if we undertake heavy training, then we will see, next slide please, a further reduction in water and in energy stores. Now, next slide please. If this is leading into a race, then the horse may start, especially after traveling as well, with a reduced water, hydration, and with reduced energy stores, which will not allow the horse to perform at its true potential. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the key really is we would like our horse to start the race with the highest possible energy stores, and certainly not with lower than normal energy stores, because this will have a negative effect on their performance. Next slide, please. So when we talk about energy stores, we are talking about muscle glycogen, which we talked about in the previous talk. And starting a race with low muscle glycogen will result in a much lower performance than the horse should be capable of. Next slide, please. Why is rehydration important? Why should we allow the horse to drink soon after racing? We know that allowing the horse to rehydrate quickly helps restore the energy stores, helps restore the muscle glycogen. We know it also decreases the risk of colic, and it also supports kidney function. Next slide, please. So, should you allow the horse to drink after hard exercise? My experience and my view is yes. People say that the drinking leads to the stomach being distended, making it uncomfortable. But this is actually a myth, because when the stomach is stretched by water, this is the thing that causes it to open and push the water through to allow the horse to hydrate. Water doesn't lead to colic and does not lead to laminitis. This is just not true. These are what we say in English is a myth. Next slide, please. So, what would human athletes take to help recover their energy after a hard training or after a race? Well, they would take carbohydrates, not simple sugars, but what we call complex carbohydrates, such as starch or maltodextrin or possibly dextrose, or some dextrose. But they would take these very soon after they finish exercising. Next slide, please. So, when would we feed carbohydrates to a horse to help restore muscle energy stores? Next slide, please. If you give a small meal high in carbohydrate as soon as possible after finishing, this can help restore the muscle glycogen. Next slide, please. And actually, what is even better is to allow the horse to drink very soon after exercise, and to give electrolytes, and to give a source of carbohydrate, because all of these things have been shown in studies to to make sure the muscle energy stores, the muscle glycogen, is as high as possible before the start of a race. Next slide, please. What else can you potentially feed to enhance recovery? Well, we've already said that even in healthy trained horses, the muscles are damaged by training and racing. Muscle damage equals pain and decreased performance. Next slide, please. So what is interesting is that there are some things that it seems to be have some effect on muscle recovery or muscle soreness. And these are things like MSM, branched chain amino acids, and high quality protein. The other area of the horse's body that can be helped to recover is the lower legs. We often get a lot of injuries to the lower legs. And we know the lower legs get very hot after exercise. Next slide, please. The heat comes from the tendons in the lower leg because there is not a lot of blood flow. But tendons are like big elastic bands, and as you stretch them, this creates heat. Now, the heat actually, next slide, please, leads to damage of the tendon cells. And the tendon cells are very sensitive to temperature. So tendons getting hot and staying hot can lead to an increased risk of tendon injury. Next slide, please. So if anything you wrap around the horse's leg, whether it is a bandage or whether it is you put on a boot, these can make the legs even hotter and so can make the problem worse. Next slide, please. So, we know that tendons get very hot during exercise. There is very good evidence that heat damages tendons. So you should put bandages and boots on at the last minute, just as before exercise. And you should take them off as soon as possible after exercise or after racing. And ideally use boots that allow heat loss. But I would say it's very important to cool the legs after hard training or after racing. Either using ice boots or standing them in cold water with ice, or using a machine that pumps cold fluid around the boots, like the ones here on the right. And I find this is a very important part of training, to be cooling the legs after hard training and after racing to help prevent inflammation, which damages the tendons, and to speed recovery. Next slide, please. One important part of, or very important part of recovery for horses is being able to lie down, because horses can only enter into a very deep sleep, what we call REM sleep, when they are lying down. If the horse can't lie down or doesn't want to lie down because it's uncomfortable, then the horse will not get the deep sleep that it needs to fully recover. And this we've seen in other sports, this can have a very negative effect on performance if they are not able to lie down. And there are now sensors which can be used to measure how much time your horse spends lying down. Next slide, please. And this is one of these devices. This is called Orscana by a company called Arionio, and this is showing what happens to a horse over 20 hours, and you can see that the horse becomes calm in the night time and is more active in the day. But you can also see in the bottom figure the amount of time that the horse is lying down in the night. Next slide, please. So in summary, rehydration and feeding are important for restoring muscle glycogen. And these are probably two of the most important aspects of recovery, especially when this is before a race. Allowing horses to drink very soon after they've finished exercise also helps speed recovery, not just in hydration but also in muscle glycogen as well. There are possibly some ingredients that can be fed that limit muscle damage and may promote muscle repair. And rest is essential for horses for their mental health as well as their physical health. And horses that are not getting enough rest, not getting good quality rest, they are likely to suffer in their performance. Thank you very much.